This is Second Edges, chapter 6 and verse 28. As for faith, it shall flourish, corruption shall be overcome, and the truth, which hath been so long without fruit, shall be declared. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasha Allah, and a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwat who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. All right, and I want to go into a lesson. Let me just bring this up. All right, and I want to go into a lesson on this. It's an Iranian man speaking from the country of Iran. All right, I want to touch on some of the things that he said. All right, in this clip. So without further ado, I want to just get straight to it, Lord willing.
They say it's black on black crime, but it's murder. Martyr is alive. Remember, from Iran to black community. You know everything. You know who is the real killer of our loved ones and yours. Having big enemies is blessing, and now we are involved with Epstein. This is Victory Lab. Marathon continues.
So he's saying.
All right, so what's happening through the Spirit is the Lord is allowing truth to start to pour out into the earth. All right, and these nations, according to prophecy, are starting to take up a parable against Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. All right, they're bringing up the crimes of the so-called white man. All right, and they're also bringing up the struggle of you so-called Negroes in Babylon the Great, which is America. All right, and we know, all right, for those who don't know, it's not just you so-called Negroes, but it is you Latinos and Native Americans, West Indians and Haitians. All right, we are the 12 tribes of Israel. All right, wherever we're scattered, and our descendants that are among other nations that may look like other nations. All right, so his statement is really to you tribes. All right, and what's happening is the world is starting to wake up in a certain way to the common problem in the earth. All right, real quick, this is Habakkuk chapter 2. All right, in verse 6. All right, and it reads, shall not all these take up a parable against him and a taunting proverb against him and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. Shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be for booties unto them? Because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. All right, so these nations are starting to identify the problem. All right, and Iran has been instrumental in these last few months on putting out videos that highlight what the so-called white man has done in the earth, not just to them, but to other nations. All right, and I want to let me see if I can run it back because there's a video with a lot more of this on it. I'm gonna have to find that one as well. But I want to run this back while I look for it. But this is beautiful, even though he's saying black on black crime, but he's pointing out the accusations the so-called white man has made against you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. You know, pointing us out as the problem while being the problem. All right, and the nations are beginning to wake up to this, and that's all according to prophecy. All right, so let's continue. Let's run it back.
They say it's black on black crime, but it's murder. Martyr is alive. Remember, from Iran to black community. You know everything. You know who is the real killer of our loved ones and yours. Having big enemies is blessing, and now we are involved with Epstein. This is Victory Lab. Marathon continues.
So he's saying it's not black on black crime, it is unalivement. And he's saying they know who the real unalivers are. And he's basically saying, hey, we're one. He's got images of Nipsey Hussle and images of Martin.
Yeah, and the other nations are figuring this out, man. They're figuring out that all the lies that the so-called white man put out, especially about so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, all right, now they're being troubled. All right. The Iranians are just one of many examples. All right. There's Isaiah 25:7, and he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people and the veil that is spread over all nations. So that veil, that deception that the so-called white man put out, you know, kept most of these nations, all of these nations really distracted from him being the actual enemy, from him being the one that's perpetuated destruction, that has taken peace from the earth. And this is why he said we know. Why does he have to say that? Because the media is set up to push the narrative of Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. It's not meant to push the true understanding of what's going on in the earth. But guess what? The Lord is raising up people. All right. Well, he starting with this truth. All right. The Lord, beginning with our apostles and elders, this truth started to pour out into the earth. And now you're starting to see remnants of the truth affect regular and other nations of people, because he's not saying we're the Israelites. He's not just coming out and saying it. Yet he is bringing up the fact that you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans have been afflicted by the so-called white man. All right. Now, let me see if I can get this really quick. Lord willing. Yeah. So let me bring out this video as well. So let's go here. And
They say it's black on black crime, but it's fucking murder. Martyr is alive. Remember, from Iran to black community. You know everything. You know who is the real killer of our loved ones and yours. Having big enemies is blessing, and now we are involved with Epstein. This is Victory Lab. Marathon continues.
I did not know that Iranians saw Nipsey Hussle as being on the same level as Martin Luther King. Like, I'm not even trolling. In Iran right now, they had a whole expedition talking about the people that were unalived by the United States.
Assalamu alaikum, peace. I'm from Iran.
They said that these guys are the same as the Iranians, one people united under one God.
From Martin Luther King, Malcolm X to Nipsey Hussle, we are all sharing the same goal, having an independent, free society.
And that they were labeled with terms like gangster, radicalist, and saying that Iran are going through the same exact treatment right now.
All these people, martyrs that you had faced and have experienced, have the same experience as us. These titles like gangsters, radicals, just like we are facing right now.
Where they're being labeled.
All right, you have to remember, according to prophecy, all right, because this is important too. These nations are starting to realize that they're being afflicted by the so-called white man as well. But you have to remember, these nations all made a confederacy with him. All right, and let's bring that out. All right, because again, while they are saying certain things that are true, they're calling Martin Luther King and Nipsey Hussle martyrs and all of this. We understand through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shah what's really going on. Yet, it has to be brought out that these nations made a confederacy with the so-called white man to subdue us as a nation of people. How we got over here is important. The Hamites, the so-called Africans, together in league with the Ishmaelites, the so-called Arabs, helped get us out of the west coast of Africa and into the hands of the so-called white man. All right, so that's how this whole system that we live in today, they were all participants. They all had a benefit, but now that deal has been broken. They made a treaty a treaty and a truce with a truce breaker, and now they're being bitten by the same serpent they benefited from for a certain amount of time. Now, Iran in particular has been sanctioned for decades, but I'm speaking on a broader scope. As a family of people on the earth, all these nations had a hand in our downfall. All right, this is Psalms 83 and 1. It says, "Keep not thou silence, O power, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O power. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom," that's the so-called white man, "and the Ishmaelites," all right, the so-called Arabs, "of Moab," the so-called Chinese, and the Hagarenes, Gabal and Ammon going into the Japanese, and Amalek going into the small hats. All right, the Philistines going into the Hamites with the inhabitants of Tyre. All right, Ashur is also joined with them. They have hope in the children of Lot. So this was a confederacy. This was a conspiracy. All right. And all of these nations, in some way, form, or fashion, benefited from you so called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans going into captivity. But what happened is once we were subdued and the so called white man had power in the earth, he began to attack those nations that he made this confederacy with. So much so that now they're beginning to scream and call out as well. Even the average so called white man in this society is also being affected by the same system he once benefited from. So when you look at what this Iranian is saying, it's true. We were accused of being the biggest problem in the earth, the gangsters and the criminals, while the so-called white man has had a reign of terror since the Renaissance. And now these nations are being affected so much that now they're starting to put two and two together, and that's through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shem Shai. All right, let's continue.
Labeled as terrorists.
You're calling us terrorists, extremists, radicals. They fought against the imperialism, tried to build their own foundation, tried to build their own society independently, and got killed.
And this whole thing kind of surprised me.
Don't be saying too much about Iran. They said that we're cool. They said that we are cool. They said African Americans have been through a lot. So don't say too much.
Many years and the world, and there are a lot of questions for the group that what is my experience as an African living in Iran? I think Iranians are one of the most curious people about the world, and that is because the country has been blocked for many, many years, and because the propaganda around the country is very massive, and because Iranians love guests. So they're very friendly to people. They're very welcoming. There are a lot of Africans living in Iran. That may shock you because the universities here are one of the best. There are many Africans who are studying here. And also in the north of the country, there are Arabs, or you can call them black. They are black Iranians, and that is not something shocking or new. Iran is a massive country. It has lots of, ethnicity and ethnic community. One thing I can say for sure, the racism that you experience in the United States does not exist here. The discrimination that you experience in the United States does not exist here. In Iran, people see color, but they don't see color through the lens of racism. They see color because we're all different. We're all parts of God's community. They don't decide to ignore your color. They see your color, they appreciate it, and they welcome it. I hope that after the war, you guys can find a way to come to Iran and visit this ancient, beautiful country and learn for yourself the real truth about Iran and do away with the lies that the United States has spent decades, telling all of us.
All right, so she pointed out the lies that the United States spent decades telling everybody. All right, and this is the covering cast being removed, and it began with the Lord dropping down his doctrine on our apostles and elders and their elders before them. And as this truth increases, you're starting to see you're starting to see it reach the mainstream, even with the Lego videos that they're doing in Iran. The younger generation are doing those videos. You've had many accounts of China speaking up against what happened to you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. The Russians have done so. All right. Because again, the so-called white man was loose for a little season to deceive the nations, but that was only for a period of time. That was only for a season. All right. Let's get that real quick. Let's go here and I'm going to get Revelation 20. I'm going to jump down to verse 7. It says, "And when 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea." All right. And that 1,000 years goes back to the Dark Ages. All right. Once it expired, you had what is known as the Renaissance or rebirth. All right. And it says he shall go out to deceive the nations. All right. And this was for a season. And now we're in that time of the deception beginning to be removed, with truth beginning to spill out into the world. And it's starting to reverberate, and you're starting to see more and more of these accounts of Iranians, all right, of so-called Chinese, all right, so-called Japanese. A lot of people on the internet in general are starting to speak out, all right, and it's ultimately because the so-called white man has vexed everyone. And now that shame is starting to return unto him. All right. There's Habakkuk 2. And I'll start at verse 10 in the NLT. It says, "But by the murders you committed, You have shamed your name and forfeited your lives. So now all the nations are starting to point the finger. Verse 11, the very stones in the walls cry out against you, and the beams in the ceilings echo the complaint. What sorrow awaits you who build cities with money gained through murder and corruption? Has not the Lord of heaven's armies promised that the wealth of nations will turn to ashes? They work so hard, but all in vain. For as the waters fill the sea, the earth will be filled with an awareness of the glory of the Lord. All right, and that's going to happen in the kingdom in its fullness. But even now, the nations are starting to kind of awake to certain realities, certain truths. You know, one of that being that the so-called white man is the common enemy that they all have. Now, they may just separate it as solely the Americans, but the Lord doesn't deal with landmass as far as nationality. You are who your fathers are. All right, and the so-called white man is a nation of people. The scriptures say the earth was given into the hand of the wicked, and they spread themselves, all right, like a green bay tree. So now they occupy all lands, you know, or many lands. I'll say it that way. Let's get this, Lord willing. This is Psalms 37 and 35. I have seen the wicked in great power and spreading himself like a green bay tree. And when you go to Malachi 1, it identifies the wicked. All right, this Malachi 1 and 4. Whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. All right. And now these scriptures are beginning to come to life even more so that the nations are now starting to identify the wicked. All right. Even if they just say it's the Americans, you know, it's leading to a certain place. And that's really biblical prophecy. All right. The 2 Thessalonians 2 and 8. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. See, there's a reason that biblical nationalities aren't mentioned on CNN, on Fox News. You may hear about Israel, you know, because they have the state of Israel, but you don't hear about Moab. You don't hear about Ammon. You don't hear about Ishmael, and you definitely don't hear about Edom when it comes to mainstream media. And that's because these scriptures are here. There's a judgment for the Edomites, so you have to identify them, and the Lord is doing that. That's why I said the wicked shall be revealed. And now you're having these other nations as they rally and they identify, you know, the things that have happened to you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, that they no longer believe the whole black on black crime narrative because now they're being smeared. Is really alluding to the wicked. It's pointing in a direction. It's another piece of evidence against him. All right. Scriptures talk about shameful spewing on our glory. All right, you just had that UFC fight, all right, where they talk about the 250 freedom, you know, but at the same time, the Lord is revealing who they actually are, and there's shame attached to their so-called glory. All right, this is Habakkuk 2 and 16. Thou art filled with shame for glory. Drink thou also, and let thy foreskin be uncovered. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be on thy glory. All right. So with that, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasha Allah, and a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwat who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. Shalom.